Hello, everybody. Welcome to this special episode where we are turning the tables, and I am going to be the guest of the show because my new book has just been released. In fact, it's released on Tuesday, May 9th in the US, and then in the UK and other countries next month in June. And it's called Awaken Your Multidimensionality. It is Conversations with Disease, Book 2. So when we were thinking about doing a show where we turn the tables and I get interviewed, I immediately thought of Kyle and Leah from the Heart Coherence Collaborative, who I had the pleasure of meeting last year when they interviewed me for their Heart Coherence Challenge, and I felt a connection with them, and they felt a connection with the first book. So we're here today with Kyle and Leah. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having us to do this.
Truly an honor. So the first book was profound and had an impact on me. And so for us to be able to do this meant a lot to us, and things reading this book got wild with disease. So we're excited to dive in and interview you. We have so many questions. So thank you, Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. This is the first time I've talked about the book. So thank you very much for doing this. And yeah, let's take it away.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to start out by saying, Deva Premal says in the beginning that she challenges kind of the reader to open to any page and it will hit you right where you're at, because this book is like speaking to your soul. My direct experience was whenever I would pick this book back up, the next thing I would read was directly applicable to my life at that time, almost in a strange way. Like, so I really felt as if disease were with me, but I kind of just want to start out with the beginning quote of the book from the Z's and just start there. You say, the Z's say, you're all existing in the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. As much as you can, enjoy the experience of being alive now. Tell people what you feel you need to tell them, show them what you need to show them, live in a way that lights you up as much as possible. Goes on to say the purpose of this book is to awaken the multidimensional soul within each of us. So can we just start there? Tell us a little bit more about the multidimensionality of this book.
Yeah. So it's interesting because they've always talked about how we are multidimensional, meaning there are so many different aspects to each of us. We all have different, I guess, sides of our personality or attributes or talents, or equally wounds or areas that we're a little bit dented. And I think the way that most of us were raised, certainly in our generation, was to think in a very linear and boxed way about who we are as humans, what life is. This is the track that has been laid down for you. You will get married, you will go to university, you will get a job. Like, it's all very limited, and it's not that those things can't be beautiful, because they can. But even that quote that you just read, it's interesting to me because when I hear that quote now, which is them reminding us that this present moment is everything, because we have a kind of amnesia about that as humans that we've been trained into. It's funny, just in this last couple of weeks, I know someone who lost their life, someone who took their life, someone who suddenly got a terminal illness, and they were very healthy and fit before, and now they're going to have to live with this illness, and everything about their life is going to have to change. And so because of this teaching that the Z's constantly have been talking about and have been in my ear about for 23 years, and then I've been, letting the Z's speak out publicly for it's 19 years now. It reminds me all the time of how precious this moment is, and not that your future isn't precious or that your past wasn't precious, but that we never really know what's coming next. And so that's just the human level. And then maybe some people will relate to this. One of the things I'm very aware of in my own awakening journey as a human is I remember there was a time when past lives were really important to me. There was a period for about, 5, 6, 7 years in my 20s and early 30s where I was very into past lives. I was having experiences and moments and awakenings, and that was really important to me at that time. There was some change that was happening in me because of the definition I had around them or my relationship to them. And now I'm like, oh, cool. You know, it's like, oh, yeah, because I know for myself, I continue to go through, I guess, new layers of awareness or integration around the fact that it's all happening all at once. You can be in your future, you can be in your past. And I'm also aware that your past life is to some degree someone else's life as well, because we are uniquely us in this life. That is what the Z's have really helped me fully understand. We have a soul, there are some memories, there is a history that we bring with us, but this form that we three are in right now, and anybody listening or watching, it's completely unique. And I think there's something kind of thrilling about that when you can really meet that. And I think sometimes there's something intimidating or scary about that, depending on how you want to kind of land in it. So for me, that quote epitomizes, in a way, just one of the many things they will say that seem to be designed to get us back to, you're here, your life force, your consciousness, you're awake, you're aware. And I know for myself, like everybody, that level of presence and consciousness moves all the time. But if I go back 20 years in my journey, and I've been a student of awareness for 30 years now, I think, wow, I couldn't access this 20 years ago because I was trying to move through some of the density and some of the wounds and some of the limited beliefs. So what I love about working with the Z's is they help me enter and experience that frequency by just kind of leading me forward each time. And then I love doing the work I do publicly because I hear and see that for people. So to me, no matter what they're talking about, they're just trying to bring us home, which is that we're far bigger than we realize. And so is this now moment. And there's so much potential in it, which I think is important to be able to access, especially as we go through these very tumultuous times on Earth, which they talk about a lot. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking about what Kyle said, which was there was sort of an instruction to just open it up and read. And I read it in a few different formats. I read it through. I also taught my phone how to speak it to me from the Books app. I also did the open up a page, which I love to do with anything. And it was funny because I kept opening to things that were talking about the heart, which Kyle and I have the Heart Coherence Collaborative. We are heart focused people as kind of our thing, doing heart coherence and focusing on the heart. So I opened up to a page and it was talking about how the universe is rebirthing and the earth represents the heart. So I was super excited. I'm always excited to read anything about the heart, but I would love to hear more about that, of how the earth represents the heart in the universe.
It's interesting that they've said a couple of different things around it. And one of the things they talk about is that what makes us very unique is our connection to emotion. And our connection to emotion is a combination of human density, which I know sometimes we think of as negative, or it can be seen as negative, that word. But they say the way that we experience emotions, and we have very visceral, embodied, connected experiences of layers of consciousness and dimensions, and we often interpret them as emotions. And I think there's a couple of different kinds of emotions that we can have. There's historic emotions, like, for example, you know, if Kyle, you were to say something to me that was a trigger for me, like let's say you said, "Oh, Lee, you're so dumb,"
Lee,
and like
you're such a
maybe
dumbo.
yeah, you say that to me, and maybe I come from a childhood where I was taught to believe that about myself by parents or by people in the, school, and it's a wound I'm carrying. It's like a fear, and you say something, and my emotion comes from within because it's old. It's like, oh, that's an emotion that's a weight in me that I haven't yet got to a place or a situation in my life where I can release it. Then there's the other kinds of emotions, which is free flowing. You see something beautiful and you have enough openness in your heart that no matter what was happening an hour ago, you can just go, wow, look at those birds flying across the sky. And there's just this kind of heart wonder about, wow, we're alive. And look, there's life happening right in front of us. And oh, there's the tax man on the phone again, and or accountant, or, whatever it was that was a little, an hour ago. So I think I feel that we have these layers of emotionality that we have often been, I think, taught are the heart in traditional human teaching, whereas I think spiritual teachings have always, for thousands of years, told us it's ephemeral and it's here and it's out here. So when I think of what you guys stand for and are being ambassadors of with heart coherence, you're really holding a space for, we have these incredible hearts. They can be human, but there is also a real spiritual intelligence to this heart that we're reopening and reawakening. And it takes work sometimes. We've got to let go of old stuff and density. And Aziz will say a lot of the emotions that very sensitive people feel can be picked up from the collective. They say that each of us are here to have a very uniquely focused emotional and heart-based journey. So for example, maybe you're here to overcome heartbreak. And so you'll have lots of situations of heartbreak that you learn to experience differently because you really want to move from heart wounds and heart shutdown. So to do that, you go, God, I had a really tough 25 years. First 25 years of my life were just full of heartbreak. And the way I used to respond was to get depressed or like hide in my room or whatever it was. And now I'm 45 and I can go, wow, that's cool. I no longer have that same response. The Z's will say that's your personal journey, but you're also creating a healed energy template and a journey in your energy field that others can feel and that you are seeding on the earth. So they say a couple of things about the earth and heart and emotionality. And they say the consciousness is rising on earth, which is causing quite a energetic war in a way between the old controlling, let's keep humans in a box stuff that's on the planet, which has been here for thousands and thousands of years, they say, and was seeded a long time ago, that more of us are beginning to question, go against, see, heal. But then they also say that it's really important that we embody that consciousness. And the way to do it is to run it through your human system. And that's what can push out the wounded areas and create space in the body where we can remember, oh, yeah, I'm a human, but I'm also a spiritual cosmic being. And we were taught to forget that part. So it doesn't mean you have to run off to an ashram and never speak to your family again because you think they're too dense. You can still be a human, but it's just that we forgot. We were taught to be amnesiac about our true spiritual nature. And so this is a time on earth where the focus on heart and the focus on consciousness is going to be really important for, people like yourselves and what you're doing. And then of course, not necessarily people who are leaders for groups in a public way, but just, the way you show up when you sit in the back of the taxi and you can tell that the person's a bit down and you're feeling pretty resourced. And so you can just kind of be heart present with them and see if that has an effect, or even not towards another person, just walking through the forest in your open heart. You're seeding a trail as you go. So those are just a couple of the things they talk about.
Yeah, I want to take exactly what you were just talking about a step further. In the book, the Z's say it's more important to be a connected person, like you were just saying, than an admired one. Societally, I feel like we want to be admired, but really, the Z's are saying it's so much more important to be connected. And I feel like that's a good goal for us all to have.
Yeah, because if you think about it, admiration, it will be really useful if you have a wound of low self-esteem, like the first few times it happens, but it's not very nutritional because it's not really yours. Like someone else's admiration, unless you're kind of in a dance with them and you're feeding off them, you see that. You'll see people who need their ego fed by certain people, but of course they're always starving because they're not actually getting any nutrition. because if admiration from people can give you the gift of your low self-esteem or feeling that no one will ever admire you, if once it's rebalanced that in you, other people's admiration is theirs. It's not really anything you should try and take and run through your own body, because it's very sweet and everything, but it's not yours. So to me, I think there is a stage for all of us, for our egos and our energy bodies, where we heal things, but then you heal things and you let go. You're not going to come back to an even more rigid identity. You're actually going to continually let go of the identity to some degree, so that you can just be present and a little less affected by all of that human stuff. And yet it's so true, isn't it, that we've all been sold a bill of goods. That same story we were told, well, go to university, get married, here's the path for you. And if you earn enough money that you can go on holiday once a year for 2 weeks, and I'm talking about my childhood, I'm aware that people listening to this will have grown up through different cultures, but that was the path I was shown. You work hard, and if you're lucky, you can afford to go on holiday for 2 weeks a year to a beach. And remember, I lived in England, so the weather is not anything to write home about until it's summer. And that was kind of what we were shown. And yet I think what's really interesting, I always paid attention to the people who were wealthy and successful, who would tell us, yeah, I mean, it's cool for the first 3 months, and yeah, I went out and bought all the cars I wanted, and then I realized, oh, that's not nutritional. It's not actually presence, connection, being with people. I think it's tricky because we have a lot of wounds around success and around money, understandably, because we've got such a stacked system at the moment where there's a few at the top with all the resources, and then most of the rest of us aren't in that place. I think it's interesting to notice how judgmental people get when they hear people tell those stories. Oh, it's all right for you to say because you're rich. And I understand that attitude if you're struggling, but actually they are giving you a true message, because at a certain point, what more do you need in terms of resources, admiration, success? I think if anything, what it can free you to is to make you go, oh, actually, what is really important is spending that time with my mum or my best friend, or being able to look up in the sky and see the birds. That's actually the value of life, rather than this kind of organized system we were sold. So, and this is a tricky time, because many of us grew up in that system, and we're sometimes very awkwardly, understandably, having to learn to create something new, even while the current system has a real stranglehold over certain things. So we're in this era of change and transformation that's tricky.
Yeah, I feel like these talk a lot about concepts that we sort of just assume are true. One of them is, people are always talking about fear and love. It's like there's only two things, fear and love. And we all know, avoid fear, like we're afraid of being afraid. So it's not really, doesn't even work, or love. But is there a purpose to both of those?
I love that you bring that up, because it is interesting. And I think in your question, you raise a really good point about our black and white world, which we're seeing right now. There's all this black and white thinking, and it's being encouraged. This group should attack this group, and it's like, oh God, that's not multidimensional. There's no gray. We need to leave room for nuance. Otherwise, we're in what I call a war mentality. If you're black and white thinking, you're in the war energy, which we've all grown up in and we've all been taught. So fear and love, it's interesting hearing you ask that question that way, because I think one of the things you get better at doing, the more you explore your own awareness, explore who you are, explore some of your isms and schisms, and go, oh, I tend to have a bit of a reaction when this happens. So now I know that about myself. I can choose to start to learn how to react differently, or how to support myself when I have that reaction. So we have the opportunity to come to know ourselves. And when we know ourselves, we can support or expand ourselves, one of the two. And I think it's interesting because if you can sit with your fear, it will move. But if you respond from your fear through action or behavior, you tend to just prolong the fear. Like you're afraid of somebody, so you act or behave in a way towards them that kind of ripples that energy toward them. They feel it, then they've got it, then they throw it back at you. It's like a tennis match. But what the Z's say is, fear is useful. Like it can be, but it should be short. It shouldn't be that you're living in a state of anxiety for 24 hours. And if you are, then there's something in your equilibrium and your balance that needs your attention. And it might be long-term trauma. It might be that you just went through a really horrific week and you haven't quite paid attention to how it affected you. There might be something going on in your country that's quite terrifying. And so I think fear and love to me are simply like two opposite ends of a spectrum that we all exist on. And what I have found interesting about fear is whether or not we'll choose to fully believe it. Like, I think it's useful to notice, I have some fear here. And I think it's very interesting, 2020 was a year we have never seen anything quite like in terms of how fear was encouraged. And we saw the consequences, because what we saw was a lot of division, a lot of polarity, a lot of pain, and a lot of suffering from all sides. So for me, the love part's easy, because that's a huge part of our true nature as spiritual beings. And the Z's will say where they are, their octave is what they call oneness. They say it doesn't look as emotional as it does to us as humans, but love is leading toward oneness. Fear is very much a human, planet Earth experience, and fear is always about disconnection. So we're either disconnected from our spiritual power, we're disconnected from hope, we're disconnected from the belief that this too shall pass. So I've always loved that phrase, this too shall pass, because it's, having had my times with depression or fear or anxiety or panic attacks at one point in my life, like it kind of taught me, because a panic attack, when you're having one, you think you are going to die. Like you literally think you're going to die. And I had them in my worst one was in a public train station. And there was right in the middle of the concourse, and it was really big, and I thought I was going to die. And there was this sweet man who was a little uncomfortable, but I knew by that point I had to have somebody touch my body, because I could feel I wanted to leave my body. And he just held his hand on my shoulder at my request, because he came over and said, "Are you okay?" Because I was on the floor. And this was like 14 years ago, when I was going through a massive spiritual awakening, and it was a tough year. And what I learned through those panic attacks was, the fear of death, which is a weird fear anyway, because as the Z's always say, you're going to like it. When you do die, you're going to like it. But as a human, the human animal is not only intrinsically trying to keep itself alive, we have been taught to fear death in a way that's really unhelpful for us. And I think also we're just not very educated around grief, because most of us fear the death of a loved one more than we fear our own death, because we're like, oh my God, how will I cope if they're not here? And the truth is, you'll cope. It's going to hurt, and it might take time for you to find yourself again, but that is the truth of life. And I think that's why, we've been done a disservice as human beings as to our true nature in the way that we've been raised and equipped to live. And so the Z's often fill in those gaps, I find, for me and for the people who like them. They'll say, yeah, you're going to die at some point, and so are certain people that you love. And we're not saying that isn't going to have pain or emotion in it or fear about it, but those are just things that are moving through you, and everything is always changing. The path of the light worker is constant change. That's what they say. And I notice when I've said that to rooms full of people at workshops, understandably, there's like some people going, oh God, I don't, it's like, and understandably, like, and I've been in that place too, where you're like, I just can't, I don't want any more. Or sometimes, and I think that philosophy can be really helpful. It's like, yeah, things are always going to change, and it doesn't mean you can't keep leaning into love, but that's why you have to be a guardian of the love in yourself, and you have to figure out how to generate love from within, and then find people you can share and flow that with, and know that even if you're brokenhearted because the person you used to love sharing that love with is no longer there, okay, well, it's a benevolent universe, and you're going to find other people who you will flow that love with in different ways. That's just how it goes.
Thank you. I'd love to touch on something that was profound for me in reading this book. It really developed my connection with nature to another level. Like, I couldn't help it. The Z's talked about it again and again, how powerful nature actually is. And they actually say that if you knew the strength and the healing energy that existed within the earth, you probably wouldn't spend as much time looking to the sky. And then they say there's crystalline structures in there, there's elements. And then they also, the part that I found mind-blowing was when the Z's were asked, where have they been between books? They said that they hang out by the crystalline structures, and those structures actually charge them up, and then they charge those structures up. I was just like, wow. So could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, apparently a lot of us, when we leave, this life, this body, we will choose to still be a part of the earth, but maybe not incarnate. So there are souls who lose the identity of the form, but will stay working with the energy of the earth. And many of us have been doing that in between incarnations. It's interesting. I'm going to show you here. This is a labradorite crystal. So I started channeling the Z's 23 years ago. I was 23. I was a student of metaphysics and personal development since I was about 15, 16. But I never thought twice about crystals. I thought they looked nice. You go into the store, oh yeah, loads of crystals. Oh, people are really into them. Okay, whatever. Soon as I started channeling, boom, something about, like, they drew me, and that's the crystal I got when I was 24. So it's the one I've had the longest. And I asked the Z's, I said, why am I holding crystals when I talk to you? They said, you don't need to, but it helps you calibrate to our frequency, because crystalline frequency is how we actually enter the earth and enter this communication field with you and this energy field with you. So I also loved that part of the book, because I learn I learn stuff all the time. Like, there's things that come out in these books that are universal, and sometimes they talk about our personal relationship, and I've never heard that stuff before, because those questions haven't been asked, and I'm not asking them. So when Diana throws these questions at them, it's very interesting. Why I love what you just framed in the question about we're always looking up at the sky, and instead the power of within the earth is really important. They have been saying that for 23 years. And when I first heard them talk about it, I was like, oh, I understood the stars and the ethers and the heaven. Like, that's kind of what I understood, or had been trained to understand. And they have always maintained that the consciousness is rising from within the earth. It's not that it's descending upon us. It's that the center of the earth is, they often say, getting hotter energetically. And the crystalline presence inside the earth, and apparently they've been there for a long time, and some of them were put there and some of them have been waiting to activate. And I'm not an expert on that stuff, but therefore the fact that they always talk about it piques my interest. So they say the amount of energy running through the ground is huge. And the thing they say about nature that I'm glad you brought up is, just imagine you're having a really tough day. You've let yourself get overstimulated, or your life has overstimulated you. Either you've spent too much time on the computer, or there's a lot of stress at home, and you can't quite just get you feel a bit like, oh God, I feel bombarded by life and I can tell I'm off. They always say, go outside. Or if you're in an apartment, look out the window if that's all you can do. Or if you have a balcony, do that. Go to your park. If you have a yard, go to your yard. Just go outside. And they say that you will neutralize, because the more you create a new environment for yourself that is dominantly nature, in much the same way that water will break our electrical energy field, a shower or a bath or being in a body of water will reset you electrically, so too can nature do that. It actually resets our nervous system, and even when we aren't aware of it, we start to lean into the rhythm and the heartbeat of nature rather than the rhythm and the heartbeat of technology, all the human emotions, the stress that our nervous system is pumping through us as our response to what we're in. So they've been talking about that since the beginning, and it's been interesting for me as a human being to come to understand that more experientially. Like now I really get it because I experience it, but when they first started talking about it, it was like, oh, maybe I should go outside, you know? Yeah, and I, also when I first started hearing from them, my ability to manage my own stress was not what it is now, of course.
Thank you.
I would love to go back to what you were talking about before Kyle asked his question. You were starting to talk about grief. And the things we're talking about how we can get so stuck in loss and grief, but that there's a better way to have a relationship with loss, especially like a tragic loss. Can you talk more about that?
It's interesting. So, we're currently working on book 4. We're talking about book 2 today, and book 3 will be demystifying reincarnation and karma. And book 4, I'm not sure what the exact title is, but it's along the lines of the spiritual power of death, dying, and grief. And, when I first heard that title, I'm like, oh, maybe that's a bit heavy. And they were like, no, no, no. They were like, no, no, no. It's really important because your world is having to come to mature around grief and around death and dying. And, if you look at all the stuff that we're going through the last few years and what's flying around, it's true. We are having to grapple with it in a new way. And they say that's part of the transformation of this time that we're in. So they call grief the great transformer. They say it's really important for us to understand that grief is a transformational process. Now, if, let's say you've just lost the love of your life, you're probably going to be on the floor emotionally and mentally, for maybe 3 months, maybe 12 months, who knows? Because everybody's so personal. Because also what happens in grief is they say that a grief window opens in you because of one catalyst. So maybe my dog passes away and I suddenly feel guilty because I am grieving my dog more than I grieved my father-in-law, for example. And I'm like, oh, why am I? And the Z's will say, well, because this dog for you was total heart connection with no interruption, because the pets can't speak and they're not carrying human density and emotion. So they say, don't judge your level of grief. Your level of grief is your level of connection. So the reason you can grieve that pet is because they kept the heart field and the emotion and the flow alive. So what you're grieving the loss of that relationship you had with the pet who could do that for and with you, and you miss them. But equally, they say that when we open up a grief window, all the old stuff has the opportunity to come out, which is why sometimes grief seems illogical. You're like, my God, why am I still crying about this 4 months later when I didn't cry about my father-in-law 5 years ago? Well, because the pet helped you open your heart. And actually, your father-in-law is in there. It might be a bit more hidden to you consciously, but that's why often I've experienced this in 2 dark nights of the soul I've had myself. And I've seen this with other people going through dark nights of the soul. Often dark night of the soul is a kind of sentence we give to a deep grief release period in our life where 1, 2, or 3 things go off in our life that just send us into a complete grief purge. And in the moment of that grief purge, depending on the level of support you're able to find, receive, give yourself, that's going to feel, quite tumultuous and can be very, very difficult. But when the grief period is done and the storm clouds start to clear and you start to see sun coming through, you are never the same person again. Because of that grief journey, because of the loss of that person, because of the grief window that opened in you and everything that poured out of you, your frequency is changed. So they call grief the great transformer, and they say the traditional fear of death on the planet is a little strange to them because the death and birth window are the same. We come in from spirit in birth and we leave back to spirit through death. And having been present for birth and death in my own life, the frequency was so similar. Like when someone literally passes over, and when you meet a baby, I have never been at an actual birth of a baby, but I was there an hour afterwards. There was this spiritual energy in both of those spaces. And so grief is the great transformer because it really makes us very present. It's why people will say, I'm really raw with grief right now, but they might feel very, very alive and heightened in a way they don't normally, because they've really brushed up against that window through which we all enter and that window through which we'll all return, because of the connection they had to that lost loved one who's gone through the window ahead of them. But in our attachment to them, we get as close to that window as we can, and it opens us.
Yeah, there was some also incredible insights in regards to channeling that I found very useful. One was that the disease basically said spirit beings aren't going to come through you. I don't know exactly what they said. If you don't want them to, like the person has to be willing. And then the other thing they said was that it's not also that the spirit beings are flowing through you. It's that the human is expanding their consciousness to allow this to happen, which I thought was cool because I have had my own viewpoint of like, oh, these beings are just flowing through you, where it allows the channeler to take more personal responsibility in doing what they have to expand their consciousness, I believe.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's interesting because the people I have cautioned against channeling is people who are experiencing a lot of mental or emotional imbalance. Because I think, you know, if you're, and I've only met a few where that's true for, but there are certain people I'm like, no, you're dealing with a lot of trauma right now, and you're dealing with a lot of mental or emotional imbalance in yourself. This is not the time to try and call in something else, because you aren't in a grounded, rooted place in yourself. And, you know, I know a few people who have had some difficult experiences, but it wasn't necessarily because of the spirit. It was because of the foundation in them that wasn't necessarily able to hold or support the spirit. You know, when I get people to channel at my workshops or online events, I always say to them, the most common objection I hear after they have channeled for themselves for a few minutes and they're looking back at it, reading it or whatever, you know, one of the things I would always hear from people is, well, how do I know I'm not making it up? And I would always say, you are. And they go, oh, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, I don't mean you're faking it. And I don't mean you're lying to yourself, but you are making it up. And it's important to understand that it's happening. The Z's did not take me hostage and say, we're just going to take over his body to let this book come out. I give permission. I can stop at any time. I'm collaborating in the experience. And I'm a big believer in that boundary. I get messages from the Z's that I don't ask for about 6 times a year. And they're usually quite important life things that I haven't yet seen, or that they want me to get prepared around. But that will just be, you know, I'll be thinking about something or visioning, and I know where they come from and I know the position, and I'll hear them say something and I'm like, oh, and then I'll, what do you, and they're like, I'm like, oh, okay. But I have a real boundary around, they don't have control over me, and nor should they. And if they ever tried to, I would back away, because no spirit should have superiority or control over you. And yet, because of the way that so many of us were taught religiously, we were taught well, this is the keeper of the doorway to God or the doorway to Jesus, and it's either your priest and here are the rules, and we'll give you the rules and you just have to follow them. And if you break the rules, you're a sinner or you're going to hell. So we have a lot in our society that has been designed to keep us away from spirit. In a way, and I have friends who love their religion and their faith, and they use it so beautifully. And I know some ministers and priests who use it so beautifully to espouse love. And then I also know the ones that are espousing fear or organizing their congregation in a way that's disempowering to them, really, on a deep spiritual level. But the people in that congregation are exploring some level of spiritual disempowerment, otherwise they wouldn't be there. So, it's not for us to judge anybody's journey, because we're all exploring different things on the planet, and often people elect to go into that to try and clean up the energy of it, but they might have to believe it 100% for 20 years before they then back out and go, oh, hang on a second, there's something wider here, and I'm here to be an ambassador of that. So I feel like I've gone off on a real tangent. What was the question?
Oh, basically just opening up to expanding consciousness.
Yeah, and I think the point is, I also had a very young view of what spirituality was when I, my first 10 years in personal development workshops. And I had that same thing many of us had, I think, which is like, oh, wow, the facilitator's amazing. And wow, how did they do that? I was wowed because that energy had not yet become normal in my world. And actually all they were doing was showing me a doorway to something I also could access. And so I'm so grateful for those facilitators, but I no longer pedestal them the way I would have when I first went in there, because I know the danger of that for both the one put on the pedestal and the one pedestaling. Pedestals are very imbalanced, and they're something to grow out of and grow through. And we all do that in our own time. But I love the differentiation that you're highlighting that the Z's make, which is, do not give your power away to spirit, co-create with spirit. It's no different to being in a toxic friendship where your friend tells you what to do and you do it whether you really want to do it or not, because that's just the dynamic you're in. It's no different to going, well, spirit's told me to move to Canada, but I don't want to move to Canada. And I would say, well, then don't move to Canada. And they'll go, but spirit's told me, and I'll try and reach them. I'll try and go, well, your body right now is shaking. You do not look prepared to move to Canada. So that's either really bad advice, or you're misinterpreting it, or you need to ask more questions. You do not have to do something because spirit said. You are spirit. So get really good at kind of allowing more spirit into your humanity so that it can all balance. So thank you for highlighting that part of the book.
Pleasure.
I feel like I am struggling not to cry, because when you were talking about the grief stuff, I just lost my dog. So
I'm sorry.
So anyway, it feels like it could be a perfect time, if you would, I know Kyle would love to talk to the Z's and ask a question.
Definitely.
So I feel like that would be wonderful. And then I will cry with my dog.
And I'm sorry about your dog, and your dog is so right here. Like, I see your dog just behind you, like literally your dog does not want to leave you energetically and isn't going to. It's interesting. If you don't mind, do you mind me just sharing a couple of things, Leah, what I'm getting? So, sometimes we have pets in our life that we have had lifetimes with, and your dog was very magic, and you and your dog had like a kind of magic conjuring together, like you would really create a heart field and a balance field together that was not just for you two, but was felt by others. And so in a way, there's a feeling for you that you just lost your little ally in terms of creating the heart field. But your little ally's going, no, don't worry, I'm right here. It's just important now that you take that next level of embodied heart without me needing to be there as the other wheel physically. And your dog's going to be with you as long as you want your dog to be with you and connected to you. But and what was your dog's name?
His name was Rozzy.
Roscoe. Yeah, he's really cheering you on because he's actually excited about the next level of power that your heart is about to take on. Because he had a power about him too, and a kind of a feistiness that was good for you to see, because you weren't always allowed to be feisty in your life, and feistiness was something that you have experienced badly toward you from people, and therefore also, which is common for us, that we'll censor it in ourselves a bit. If we feel how feistiness affects us, we'll kind of dampen down our ability to know that we can tell the truth. And Roscoe was very angelic, but also quite feisty. And so now you're going to find the feist and the boundary in yourself just a bit more, which will let your heart grow. Because he's not here to play that out anymore. And you're going to miss that energy, but you're going to find that energy in yourself. So
Thank you for that.
yeah, he's funny.
I started crying. That was all worth it.
That was amazing.
Okay, so I'm just going to take a second, and the Z's will probably they may probably start with a message normally, and then they'll ask you for any questions, Kyle. Very wagging tail from Roscoe right now. Okay. Good. A pleasure to be with the two of you specifically, because of what you stand for on Earth at this time, which both of you have stood for before. Leah is very experienced at standing for heart energy on Earth, and for you, Kyle, this is a new incarnation where being an ambassador of heart is concerned, which is why your life has been somewhat overwhelming in the emotional department. It is not that you have not been a leader before, but you have been, shall we say, a little more in the mental leadership on prior lifetimes on Earth, and you have a wizard energy that allows you to be quite masterful in what you can conduct and see, and you are still coming into your power in that area of your life. But the reason the two of you combined is because Leah is coming into her higher mind in a new way, and you are coming into your higher heart in a new way. And so the two of you already had a skill in those areas. And the reason we are pleased we are speaking to you is because you are being ambassadors of heart consciousness on the planet right now. For the last 2 to 3 years on Earth with Lee, our work has focused on opening people's third eyes, people's intuition, and people's eyes. We have had different stages with Lee throughout the time of him working with us to bring the message to groups. But in the last 3 years, there has been an escalation in the frequency that we emit and Lee emits around helping people open their intuition, their third eye, and also the eyes to see clearly what is happening on the planet. And of course, like with all of you on the planet, whether you are doing, shall we say, public work or not, you all go through phases where different things get highlighted, different things get spotlit, different skills and attributes come forward at different phases of your life. So the reason we are pleased to be speaking specifically with you today is because we always use the heart in Lee's energy field as a baseline for our messages. And so to be in both heart consciousness and intuitive consciousness with the two of you is very important for, at this moment in time, a great deal of shedding is taking place for humans in the area of the stomach and below, the base chakra. There is a lot of density and old, shall we say, emotional and energetic knots leaving people's bodies. But the place that is, shall we say, a little more reachable in people right now is the heart and the higher mind and the third eye. So that is why there is often a sense of balm for so many of you, or a sense of soothing when you get to access these frequencies. It is because they are frequencies that have been somewhat underdeveloped collectively in your culture at this time on Earth, but they are frequencies that are a remedy for all of you right now, not just individually, but a remedy that's needed for the planet. for a more aware, a more intuitive, and a more heartfelt future is what humanity must and will create if humanity is to continue on Earth in the way that it is destined to. So, with all of that said, we will turn it over to you, Kyle, for any questions you feel called to engage us with.
Thank you, Aziz. It's truly an honor to be here with you. I love you, I appreciate you, and I feel you. And in regards to what you talked about my personal journey from the mental energy to the heart energy, I agree with you. And it can be so hard to get out of this mental energy, not just for me, but as I personally make this journey into my heart, as we collectively make this journey into our heart. What advice would you offer to make this an easier journey?
Well, firstly, we would say do not try and get out of your mental energy, because it's beautiful. Instead, and we understand why you put it that way, and we honor what you said. But what we want you to understand is that your mental energy is a gift through the lifetimes. Now, there is a big difference between your mental energy and your mental programming. So a mental belief or programming will not feel very expansive. But a mental energy that is alive and connected will feel expansive. So for example, let's say you are creating something in your home. Your mental energy will be a great asset to you, and it will come in and it will want to play. It will want to be part of the problem solving, the creativity, the building, and that is a great gift. Your mental energy will not feel good to you if you suddenly realize you are regurgitating an old or limited belief that you were given by society or that you had to take on because of circumstances, because your heart won't feel like it's allowed to be present. So rather than getting out of your mental energy, we would say, just keep focusing on allowing your heart energy, because guess where the heart's going to go? To the mind. Why do you think the throat chakra is so powerful? It is the connection between your heart, your higher mind, your third eye. And that is why for some of you it can be quite difficult to speak your truth, because there is not yet an alignment between heart and mind, or not yet a trust. And when we say not yet an alignment, we want any of you listening who are kicking yourselves about that to notice that judgment you just put on yourself. It is quite hard to have an alignment between your heart and your mind on Earth right now because of the training you have all come through. So be careful of judgment. Judgment is what we call a stop sign. Whenever you catch yourself judging yourself, just see a big red stop sign and realize that's what you're doing to your progress, your ability to expand, your ability to go on. So what we love about what you said, Kyle, is you are, yes, in a male body in this lifetime, and you are also embodying the journey of male consciousness at this time. For just as women have been denied areas of their power culturally and collectively over the last few hundred years and before, so too have men been denied the power of their hearts, their emotions. And what all of you are trying to do is reunify yourselves individually and collectively. So we would say, rather than trying to get out of your mind, if ever you notice you are very in your mind, that's when you go to nature, or that's when you do the thing that you know opens your heart. So for example, you earlier mentioned Deva Premal. Deva Premal and Miten, who are wonderful high-frequency channeling musicians on this planet at this time, are frequencies of music that Lee will use a lot to change his field. He knows when he tunes in to their music and Deva's voice, he will go into the heart frequency. So if he notices he needs to rebalance himself and come more to his heart, he can press play on one of their pieces of music and get to his heart. So there's nothing wrong with having a strong mental energy, because for many of you, that's an incredible gift. What you're actually bothered by is the lack of balance. And you can feel the part of you that wants your heart to get to be involved, because when your heart and your mind combine, imagine the extraordinary acts of consciousness you will create on the planet, both energetically and in form for others.
Wow. Thank you. I feel complete after that. So I appreciate you, Ziz, for that wisdom. And I have felt you as I've been reading this book. So I look forward to continuing to get to know you and expanding our relationship.
Well, the wisdom that you share is the one conducting the conversation. So all we do is respond. Leah, do you have anything you wish to ask?
I think that it would just be some kind of practical advice when you're caught in repeating patterns of emotion and behavior that seem almost like out of your control.
Well, there are a couple of layers to this. So firstly, and we and Lee have been talking about this at length in various teachings over the last months and year. You are in a period of time where body trauma is leaving the planet more and more. Now, you may say, well, it doesn't look like it. It looks like there are just as many re-traumatizing events taking place. But we would say the opportunity through re-traumatization is to see and know the trauma and work to release it. Now, there are certain scenarios on Earth where you are trapped in trauma. And we don't want to not acknowledge that. There are certain cultures, there are certain life situations that people find themselves in that are very traumatizing. And that is not something that is easy to get above or get beyond in the moment that you are trapped in it or it is happening. But when you speak about repeating patterns, there are a few different depths to your question. So the deepest depth of repeating patterns and behaviors is to ask yourself, what trauma in my body needs more help than my mind or my awareness can give? You can have epiphanies about what you could do differently, how you could support yourself to do things differently. But if you've tried so many things and you still find yourself compelled to repeat something that you know is not good for you, particularly if it is highly distressing for you, or it is lowering your frequency in a way that you recognize is not good, that is the time to go to body-based trauma support. You may choose to work with a practitioner of this. You may choose to educate yourself through books and videos to try and understand it a bit more. So that is the deepest layer of repetitive behaviors. And the way you will know you need to look at what trauma your body is carrying that you have less control over than you would like when it comes to changing your patterns and behaviors is the depth of the problem. So for example, we will look at addiction as an example here, because this is quite popular on Earth and quite well understood, increasingly understood, that there are those who have addictive tendencies that will send them to what some of you will call the depths. The term is often called rock bottom. They repeat this pattern over and over again with ever worsening circumstances and effects until they hit the floor in such a way that they realize they have to overcome this addictive behavior. So too is that what's happening for many of you on the planet right now around your patterns and behaviors that you are repeating. But if we move up the scale, a little away from deep body-based trauma that is the thing that's in your way, the question to always ask yourself is, rather than trying to control or limit your behavior or modify your behavior for a while before you go back to the behavior again, ask yourself, what am I getting out of this? So let's say you know that eating too much sugar isn't good for you, and yet you find yourself doing it over and over again. A question that you can ask yourself is, why am I doing this? And then a second question, if you don't get an answer on why am I doing this, is what am I getting out of it? Because we promise you, you're getting something out of it. Now you may say, well, I'm not, because then I feel terrible the next day and I know better. No. Some part of your timeline, and maybe it's your 5-year-old self or your 12-year-old self, has an alignment with this as a way of soothing, or a way of comforting, or a way of detaching, because sugar has a very powerful effect on the body. So it is its own kind of drug, and it is giving you some moment of escape. So rather than beat yourself up for reaching for the cookie jar every time you feel overwhelmed, If you ask yourself, what am I getting out of this? And the answer is, it helps me switch off. And then you say, why do I need to switch off? And you hear, because I'm stressed and overwhelmed. So you currently see cookies and sugar as the solution to being stressed and overwhelmed. Are you happy with that solution? You say no. So what you need to do is get ahead of the stress and overwhelm. Where are areas of your life stressing you out or overwhelming you? And how are you going to start to identify what those areas are and bring in other things to soothe you? So for example, let's say Lee was the one going for the cookie jar. He wouldn't get very far if he just started beating himself up or promising himself and all his friends, I will never eat a cookie again. Well, that's not really getting to the bottom of the problem, is it? But if he realizes that stress and overwhelm is what's making him reach for this changed state that sugar gives him, and this feeling of escape, and this feeling of temporary pleasure, and this feeling of uplifting himself, he will realize, oh, I'm not giving myself what my energy field needs. So I'm going for this quick hit as a remedy to my starvation in my energy field. If he identifies that, and then he starts asking himself, well, what makes me feel less stressed or overwhelmed? And Deva Premal and Miten come up as one of his things. Then he starts to rewire his pattern by including the things that will help him avoid stress and overwhelm before he forcibly removes or restricts the cookie behavior. And what he will find at some point is the cookies are no longer that interesting. Maybe once or twice a year he likes to do that, but he will slowly let it go. The more he gets to the bottom of what that behavior is trying to fix and gives himself alternatives to fixing the behavior before he gets to that point. So that is just one example of how it works. So the questions to ask are, what am I getting out of this? Or what do you think you're getting out of it? Why am I needing to do this? Ask yourself what, ask yourself why, and when you've identified those questions, then start to ask yourself, okay, so what other remedies can I start bringing into my life before I get so desperate that I have to do this thing that no longer feels true to me as a solution?
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, if it is okay with you both, we feel we have a little message we would like to share before we depart. Unless, Kyle, you have any burning question.
No, I would love to hear the message.
Good. We know that these times on Earth are tricky. We must implore you to not underestimate that. And we know many of you don't, but not underestimating that does not necessarily mean throwing your hands up in despair and running around your street saying, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. Because if you do that, you will be doomed. Anybody who is believing they are doomed and repeating to themselves that they are doomed and aligning with people or messages that they are doomed, you will create some kind of doom in your human life. Now, if you see doom as death, you are mistaken. You are going to die. You are going to die. You might die when you're 95 or 110. You might die when you're 7. This is the truth of life on Earth. So we understand that many of you care deeply about what's going on Earth right now. Some of you are activists. Some of you are there to help work on human rights. Some of you are there to help the Earth. There are a great deal of imbalances coming to the surface on Earth that you are seeing, feeling, and working with in a way that has never been before on Earth in this way or time. And it is tricky territory you are navigating, but guess what? If you align yourself with your spirit and you make sure you are not abandoning your sense of your own spirit, you will attract and we will say, combine with and collaborate with other beings and people who are also working for the same frequency. And that frequency is your home. Remember, there are stories you are being told about Earth that are black and white, and it is not that black and white. The doom and gloom monger is seeing everything through a lens of doom and gloom, or they're trying to get you to see it through a lens of doom and gloom. That is not a multidimensional way of seeing a multidimensional planet. And there is incredible beauty, birth, and life happening every day on your planet. And there are also people who have the know-how, the tools, the resources for a better future on Earth. Yes, there is a bit of a war going on the planet that many of you are aware of. Some of you are less aware of it, and that is fine. You will each see what you need to see at the right time, and you will align with where you need to align. But if there is one place we would ask you to align with, it is the memory that you are not just of spirit, you are spirit embodied on Earth. Yes, you are human. Yes, you get to be a wonderful human being having all of the human experiences that are unique to this period of history. And by the way, there are many good things about this period of history. If you could only be shown the history books of the last 1,000 years, while we are not saying you wouldn't still have some concern about what's going on right now, you would be quite sobered to see how difficult life has been on Earth always, in many different ways. And so there are many gifts that many of you have right now that have put you in positions to be antenna for others around remembering that the light and the consciousness that is here on Earth is designed to usher you through this transformational era. And you may be here to see it all, and you may not, but that does not matter. The time of your death has nothing to do with the way you live on Earth. That is why so many of you don't want to know when it's your time. You shouldn't. But there is something true to this idea of living like there is no tomorrow, because that is your truth. It is important for you to fully live today. So you will not live if you don't align with spirit. For some of you, that might come through your Christianity and your connection to Jesus. For some of you, that might come through your rejection of humans and religion and spirituality, but your alignment with nature and your joy of gardening and being in the earth and planting and helping the energy field of nature to grow and flourish on Earth. You are all here to be different and to have different alignments, but not one of you on Earth is here to disconnect from spirit. And you are currently living on a planet where many of you have been trained into doing just that. Not you who are listening or watching, but many on Earth. And that is why there is, we will say, a spiritual dis-ease on Earth right now, because the truth of who you are has been forgotten. And so many are walking around believing half-truths they have been told, but knowing that they probably should feel better than they do. No matter what your circumstance on Earth, you can remember that this beautiful body of yours is the home of spirit. And through it, you get to spiritually experience your life, this world. You get to emanate, you get to receive. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And the greatest difficulty we have when we give you these messages is we know that we butt up against parts of you that do not feel extraordinary. And so you either become suspicious of our words or feel upset by our words, or you start crying because you have a release of the pain inside you that you can feel is in the way of you knowing that you and life are extraordinary, but you are. We cannot put it any other way to you. And the more you start to remember your cosmic inheritance, your spiritual connection and ancestry on Earth, and that is also buried within the Earth, the crystalline grids and crystalline energies and physical crystalline objects that are within your Earth are waking up in a way that is waking that up for all of you from the inside, not necessarily from above, even though a great deal of cosmic energy and visionary connection and communication comes from above. But it is your inner bodies you are now awakening. And so as you each awaken your inner bodies, so too do you awaken a new human soul on Earth for a new time. And that is the work you agreed to come here to do right now. Yet that work can be joyous and can be connected. And of course, human life is educational. So you have ups and downs, you have learnings and lessons. But the lessons get difficult, painful, and dark when you disconnect from spirit. And there are periods all of you have done that, and that's okay. We're not judging you for any time you disconnect from spirit, but we are simply reminding you that disconnection from spirit is disconnection from self and wholeness and oneness. So whatever you are doing in these times right now, make your connection with your spiritual well-being of the utmost importance, because we assure you the distractions of human life will drag you into human life all of the time. But the human training will not necessarily ask you to pay attention to your spiritual well-being. That is what we and other messengers on the planet are here for. So, you are an incredible force on Earth, having an incredible experience at an incredible time. And when it doesn't look that way, know you need to reconnect to the light, to love, and to what lights you up. We say that not to reassure you or to soothe you. We say that literally to help you fall down less. Good. In peace and in love to all. Ha.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us to do this with you.
Thank you so much for saying yes, and thank you for the beautiful space you held for me and for the book and for the Z's and for everybody listening and watching and what we all agreed to come here and do today, hey?
Absolutely.
I think we did it.
Yeah. We love you. Thank you, Lee.
Love you guys. Thank you so
Love you
much.
back.
And, yeah, and everybody who's tuned in, thank you so much. You know, we did this to celebrate Conversations with the Z's Book 2, which comes out in the US and Canada on May 9th, and then other territories in June. It's a book. It's also an audiobook. So if you listen to the Audible version, you hear the original conversations between psychotherapist Diana Edwards and me channeling the Z's. So they are the conversations as they happened, and then the paperback and Kindle version are the transcripts, the edited transcripts, if you like to read and have it in book form. And for Kyle and Leah to stay connected to them and everything that they do, all of the wonderful work, you can find them at Heart Coherence Collaborative. And we will put links underneath the video or in the show notes if you're listening for where you can find Conversations with the Z's Book 2 and Book 1. And of course, all of my work is found at leeharrisenergy.com. But Kyle and Leah, thank you so much. This was a real pleasure and treat for me. So I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you. And thank you to everyone for watching. But truly go get this book. It's more than just a book. It's a conversation with your soul that will resonate and change you profoundly. That's my experience. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.